All right, Zach and Sarah, you can go ahead and get started.
All right, thank you. Let's see. I think
Thank you
Zach,
for
are you sharing?
yeah, I'm just trying to get the window
Um,
select.
okay, perfect. Yeah, while you're doing that, I can start with just introducing myself. I'm Sarah Norris. I'm a senior security consultant here at TrustedSec. I've been at TrustedSec for 9 years now, and I've been working on the TAC team for about maybe 6 years now. Um, so Zach and I both work on the tactical awareness and countermeasures team, performing purple teams pretty often here. And outside of that, I do a lot of offensive testing or regular pen testing, um, some phishing, things of that nature. So when we are doing purple teaming, we all kind of wear different hats. But a lot of the time, I really enjoy doing the red team side of things and performing the offensive attacks.
Hi, and I'm Zach Bevilacqua. So we're both on TAC. I've started on TAC. I've only been with Trusted Sec for about only 3 years or so. And most of my background is all defensive, right? So in corporate environments and things like that. Came over here, focus on more of the defense side, and yeah, we all chip in on different things. So I do the pen testing and other things as well. Not so much the fishing. That's Sarah's jam. So thank you. All right. So everyone's here. Talk about purple teaming and how it's going to help. With purple teaming, I would say it's going to net you better results. Maybe I'm a little partial, but when you have the communication between your defensive teams and maybe your engineering teams, and if you have offensive teams or you're hiring someone to come in as the offensive team and talk with your defensive teams, you're going to get a better feedback loop on that. So we look at that as enhancing your detection capabilities, right? You put those scenarios into practice. You see them actually, you see your environment and your tools react live. And hopefully you have this dialogue back and forth with all your teams and get your detections and your defenses in place, or at least um, tasks that need to be taken care of in the plan to be taken care of in time until your next iteration. And in on TAC, when we do our purple teams, we have a few different offerings and how we do that. But for the most part, we're on a call with your teams all day, and we can have these conversations. We'll run these attacks. We show the attacks happen, and we'll talk through the querying and the detection, and we can all work together and do that, and we'll move on to the next thing after that's first scenario is complete, and so on and so forth. um,
Yeah, that's
I
really
don't know, Sarah, do you have anything?
the yeah, totally. Yeah, these are some of my favorite types of engagements. One thing that I love about the purple team offering that we have is, like Zach said, it's kind of simulating us all being together in a conference room. So, we have people from different teams, whether it's, uh, you know, a SOC or, they're just monitoring the SIM. They might have a big team, a small team. They might have a MSSP or, just a point of contact for that. But what's great about it is we really get to take a look at this specific organization, really talk about what kind of threats they might be facing, what they're really worried about, maybe what they feel like they might be kind of weakened in terms of like visibility. For instance, I had a client recently that was really concerned about like VSTO attacks, like Visual Studio Tool Office attacks. And so we had time, prior to the engagement to kind of come up with some attack scenarios that we could run that really addressed those kind of threats, and then write some detections customized to um, maybe like an attacker leveraging that specific technique. And so I really love the format of it. Like Zach said, we have an open meeting running all day, where whoever is working on the trusted tech side can show the attack that they're running, what tools they're using, whether they're doing it remotely, whether they're doing it like on a workstation itself, and explain, how it works, what it's trying to accomplish on the back end, and then, maybe what an attacker would be trying to gain from running that attack. So it's really informative. It's really, really educational. I think for clients, it really helps them learn about their own organization. Um, and also, yeah, sometimes you get to see these expensive tools that you're putting into place actually, have to show that they're working and working the way that you expect them to, or hoping that they will work. Um, so yeah, just that whole format of like having an open meeting. Hey, how does that work? Or actually, specifically in this environment, we block, these types of files from being run, or our employees typically can't do this, or yeah, we have to allow them to do this. So everything is very, very customized. And the ultimate goal is to just improve your overall awareness, security posture, visibility. So they're great for that in general. And then on the slide, what we're trying to kind of show you are the main points, the purpose of it. Obviously, you want to enhance your detection capabilities. Like I said, you want to see, you might want to address what kind of threats you're worried about currently. Maybe you've had engagements done in the past where they leverage like specific types of attack techniques, or they found like a really quick attack path. And maybe you mitigated that, but you're not sure if it's still in place or if there's another way to do it. So this is a great kind of opportunity, a purple team to say, hey, let's try that. Let's test that out. Um, Maybe that you aren't monitoring for certain kind of logs, or you don't have a lot of alerts in place for that. And then most of all, I think purple teaming is so important to kind of provide that extra layer of detection. Maybe, you have tools in place that will prevent an attack or block it, but there's always that scenario you have to assume, what if it's misconfigured, or what if there's a workstation that doesn't have it? What would happen then? What is that extra layer? How are you going to know if this is happening, if the tool fails, if the EDR fails or something?
And I don't know how many times we've done purple teams and we run an attack and the client is sure they have the detection, they built the detection, they've tested it in the past. It should be pretty solid, but we'll run the scenario and we'll find something, right? There's an issue with the logging or the parsing, or a tool got misconfigured and no one caught it. And the attack was allowed to run without a detection, but in that moment, we were able to identify the issue and correct it, sometimes even within that day. And I think that's great, whether you're on with Trusted Sec or you have internal teams or you're with someone else. Purple teams are great at identifying these things that you maybe either can't always know about, or just randomly happen and you miss them. Having a purple team every so often, I think, is a great idea, to prove out your entire solution as far as security goes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. I think it does happen more often than we think. And not even just maybe things aren't working the way you expect them to. But, sometimes things just change. Maybe like this field that this alert has always used has changed, or maybe even like Windows has changed something. And so now, a different parameter has to be considered. So, doing these every so often, really taking a look at, common attacks, common detections, where the anomalies really lie in your environment. And if you're going to be able to pick up on those, it's just a great exercise in general.
Absolutely.
I also wanted to mention if there are any questions while we're going through any of these slides or about any points that we're talking about, feel free to use the Q&A to submit those questions. And then we'll also have some time at the end to go over any questions that anyone has.
Yeah, feel free to ask the questions anytime, and we'll get to them as we go, and we'll get to as many as we can if there are a lot of questions. And so don't be shy, ask a question. We'll be able to give you at least an answer. And right, that's kind of the overall about purple teams and how they can be used, right? And like I was saying before, with the communication is a big deal. That real-time feedback. So we're talking about we're on those calls. We like to have the calls open, and anyone on the team, anyone from any team who's interested or wants to be a part of it can join in, and they can have a conversation, they can query things while we're running attacks, and that real-time feedback, as Sarah was saying, is key, where you can see these things happen and everything react, and it gives defenders a chance to maybe practice on live data that they wouldn't otherwise without an actual malicious attack. So having that real-time feedback and then being able to ask questions, right? um, I don't like to tell people I'm an expert. I do this a lot, but right, when we're on the phone, or when we're actually having these engagements and we're talking with your teams, um, that's a great time for us who see all these things every day. If you don't have that type of exposure to attacks or um, certain scenarios, that you can ask those questions, right? We can talk them out. We can even try to simulate them as best as possible and show you what those look like. As a defender in corporate world, there's not a lot of exposure to the attacker viewpoint of things. It's a little better now with some of the labs and things, and challenges and things like that, but um, it's very difficult to see that whole event play through from an attacker's perspective, and see how an attacker can pivot, right? If you put a defense in place, an attacker goes to run a certain attack and they hit a roadblock. um you know Sarah and I and everyone else on the team, we're going to pivot. We're going to still try to be successful and see if we can get that to run. I've had several scenarios where we would run an attack, we would get blocked. We just, whatever it is, change it from PowerShell to command, or use a different term or string. And now the attack is successful, even though a lot of time has been spent on a prevention or detection on that technique. So it is a great experience to have when that's going on live.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, it is. It's there's something really special about kind of having, like you said, that open dialogue about, hey, we do pen testing, offensive testing all the time. Here's what we would do to get all these wins, right? To just pwn this entire environment. But that's not the goal of a purple team. It's, kind of going through it slowly and saying, this is where I would start if I didn't have anything. I'd need to get a foothold. What would I do as an attacker? What would I look at first? What are some of the tools that are really popular right now? What's the newness that's out there? So we really get to kind of discuss that with these teams that are defending, that I'm sure maybe they know about it, but maybe they don't really get to see it in the wild. So, we get to kind of simulate that. And like Zach said, create that data so that you can work with it, and really have the opportunity to not just, create a detection for, let's say, we can go something simple, but like, basic reconnaissance or password spraying, but to kind of dive deeper and say, okay, great, we have an alert, we know when that's happening, but technically, like this is happening all the time. So then Zach and I could come in and say, all right, but realistically, how do we kind of isolate this an attacker doing it versus what's normal in the environment or what you can expect to see, so that we can create this more high fidelity, um, less, I guess, less noisy attack, something that you will only see if someone is running it in this way, um, as someone who doesn't know the environment or is using a rogue device or is coming from, a strange origin, or touching a odd destination. And so I think that's wonderful. It's a great opportunity, to have that open dialogue and to really talk about your concerns and to say, well, what if you tried it this way? This got blocked. So like Zach said, well, let's just modify it a little bit and see if it still works. So it's kind of a fun experiment.
Yeah. And I know we've been talking about a lot. I mean, how we do things. And we would love it if you would call us and have us hang out for a week or so and run these attacks and chat with you guys. But right, you can do these internally as well, as long as you're getting your teams together. I always say with in security and in defensive teams, if you're not in communication with your SOC, it doesn't matter if it's separated actually by teams or just by functionality of people. If your SOC is talking to your SMEs or engineers, and your detection engineers and even your other IT teams, as long as you all have that conversation and you're working as partners to achieve this security goal, whatever it is that your team is trying to do, you're going to be highly effective. And so with the purple team, you're kind of generating this scenario where you have these teams come together, and whether you have an internal team that is allowed to do offensive activity in the environment. I know there are some environments that don't allow for that stuff from the internal team, so you have to bring someone in. That's where we come in, or anyone else that you want to have do that with you. And you can then get those teams together, and now you have partnership where you're working together to stop the attackers, right? You don't want them doing anything in your network. And I can tell you, I've been in networks that were highly permissive. I could do whatever I wanted and I would go undetected. Or I've been in a network that was incredibly frustrating and you can't do anything. There's no movement, and everything in between. So I think that communication is key. And then right, we have attack paths on the screen right now. There, it's obviously not exhaustive, but we threw a couple of big ones up there. And in your defensive strategies, I would say, pick a few things that are important to you and try to take care of those, right? Cut those paths off so you're stopping entire attack chains. And I would start with the basic. Leave whatever's in the news out and just start with the most basic things, like the credential reconnaissance can be a little tough, because that's usually passive, but the stuff like credential harvesting, and privilege escalations, that's noise generated by the attacker, and that's usually just network requests and different things like that. Um, Trying to focus on detections that are less tool based and more behavior based.
Yeah, definitely. Like Zach said, this isn't, a comprehensive list of attack paths, or attack techniques in general, but it's just kind of an example. Um, and really, what, like you said, what we're trying to do is use common fundamental attacks, whether it's living off the land, attack techniques, or just, leveraging um, Kerberos, or just things that are happening within the Active Directory environment in general. Um, we're trying to take the logs that are generated regularly, um, hunt for those, and then kind of key off of certain parameters in our hunting techniques so that we can really highlight the anomalies or things that probably shouldn't be done by a regular, low-level user or even a privileged user. This is kind of out of the ordinary. Um, and so it's pretty fun. Typically, what we're looking for or what we're using with a lot of our queries or specific, attacks are, or sorry, detections are like Windows event logs. Keying off of those and then looking for like specific fields or properties that are only generated when they're doing it in relation to this specific attack path. And then what I love about the purple team is that while we're hunting for that, we're typically like sharing what we're seeing. Every environment is different. You might have that event ID, but you have different properties being ingested. Um, or we're seeing a specific attack technique generate a different event log, or you might not have that event log. So what else can we use? Whether it's like sysmon or, chaining two other event logs together to create a detection that works for you. Um, and then, yeah, like I said, a lot of these, maybe this is something that you'll see regularly in the environment. Take Kerberoasting, for example. That's not totally out of the ordinary, but maybe it's odd to see someone querying every SPN in the environment rather than just one. Or, one is always queried, but, all of them aren't, or this specific one isn't. And then, at the same time, we can kind of provide some guidance too, like, okay, maybe this is a really noisy thing that's happening a lot. How can we create something that, is high fidelity, that we only get alerted if this is happening by an attacker? So we can provide some guidance there, like, maybe you should create a honeypot account, and then anytime you see that one being touched, that that's probably malicious or odd, and you're only going to see that alert, pretty rarely. It's not going to be happening all the time because that it's not a real account, or it's a honeypot, it's a trap. Um, and then, same with a lot of these, whether it's like spraying um, or password guessing. You might have really good policies in place and be like, well, we're not really worried about, password spraying because it's really unlikely that someone's gonna, you know, guess a 14-character password that, doesn't use any of our ban list words. And that's great. But why not, have an extra detection there that says, well, it's really strange, that this one source or this one IP is trying to authenticate with this one account to, um, you know, 50 or more machines within like a minute. That seems odd. So why not have a detection there? It's just like I said, that extra layer of protection, even if you do have great policies in place. Um, yeah, and the other part of this is we kind of mentioned it before, but um, maybe or you're thinking like, well, we've done something similar to this exercise before, and we created all these detections. Well, having another purple team exercise, whether, like Zach said, it's with us, a third party, or with your internal teams, it's a great opportunity to validate some of those detections and, run them again, see if they're working. Um, maybe using different tools or different methods. Um, maybe running them remotely instead of, directly on a domain joined workstation or something. Um, so this can be, this list of attacks can really be changed up or customized to whatever you need within your organization, or maybe whatever higher ups are concerned about. And then what is beautiful about it is taking each of those attack techniques simulated individually and kind of having some kind of representation, whether it's in a report or just notes taken from the exercise itself, just saying, okay, for this one we could improve in these ways, or we could respond a little faster, or we had to hunt for this alert rather than this alert popped up everywhere and we were well aware of it. um, so it's nice to kind of see that represented visually. Okay, here's this list of all the attacks that we ran and simulated, and here's the spots where the EDR failed, or they were able to bypass it, or the EDR blocked it. But when we put it in monitoring mode and they did bypass it, we didn't have any other kind of visibility. So it's a great way to see that. It's also a great way to inform, other facets in the company of what you're doing, how you're improving your security posture. That's another big part of purple teaming is you get that validation, you get that, paper representation of here's where we're at, here's how we've improved. After doing an exercise like this, look at where we've modified things, we've made changes, and now it's working, better than expected or better than before, hopefully.
Absolutely. As long as you're taking your notes, like Sarah had said, when you do it, at least with us, I'm not sure about anywhere else, but with our reports, everything's recorded. As far as screenshots and any of our attack commands, any queries that are built as part of either a detection or hunt queries, those are all in the report. And so if you wanted to replay all those attacks, you can do it from the report. You have proofs, right, that those things happened and that they're events. So you would take the output of your purple team, and then you can actually just you take that as tasks, right? So that could be a task list for executing strategy, and you can kind of use that to see the gaps, if there were any, and uh, if you modified any of your queries, right? There's definitely ways to show value with maybe you had a detection in place and during your time with the purple team, you modified it and you've made it better, right? So that's actually a value add based on the time that you spent on that, even though you were essentially already covered, right? Maybe there was more logging or a different perspective that you can see the detection from, or maybe there was a tweak that you could do to make the um, you can tune the alert a little bit to be less noisy, right? Good alerts aren't going to go off all the time, and the quiet alerts or the quiet detections. I mean, that's great as long as it fires when it's supposed to. And um, what I would say, with what Sarah was saying, you can use events to find the activity and to to essentially be ready for a purple team. I would say, do we have that on the next slide? Okay, this kind of more generally goes into the attack. So um, being ready for a purple team means that you should have some logging up front. Now, there are other, at least TrustedSec offers different things to make sure your defensive readiness is good. But with a purple team, you would want to already have logging in place. So you need that telemetry in order to build detections or to tweak your detections. And whether they're built in or they're custom detections that have been deployed by your teams, making sure you have a good logging base. I always recommend host logs. You can use a lot of EDRs have really great telemetry. but the perspective of the EDRs isn't quite the same as getting them directly from the host itself. So, this is Windows logs or syslog from other devices or Linux machines. Because that perspective is something happened, the OS interacted with something, and it recorded that event. Some events do need to be configured to be turned on or to have more data in them. So I would say focusing on your user-centric environments, have the host-based logging, and then you do have to centralize that into a SIM, hopefully, or some other searchable log repository you can build detections in and alert your security teams. And that would allow you to gain visibility into this attacker activity. And I would say don't focus on the server environments. They may be very sensitive, but an attacker is focusing on your users. They have the access to things and they can manipulate users easier than service accounts or applications or hardened servers.
It's more of like the jumping off point. Um, and it is, I mean, essentially like your weakest point, and our users are typically the weakness. Um, but that being said, too, whatever kind of log repository it is, we're very flexible. We've had, Zach can speak to this more than I can, but I think he's probably worked in every sim out there. And some are better than
Just
others,
about.
but yeah, but we definitely are very flexible in like working with what we have. We also understand too that you might be just ingesting everything. Well, that's great and very helpful, but unless you can really like, write queries or know the language to kind of get in there and, weed through it and accomplish what you're trying to see or filter out what you're trying to see, it's not very helpful to have all those logs. So we love it when we see like that there's a lot to work with. Um, and we're pretty adaptable to picking up whatever language we need to use to write the queries that we need to do or need to write that detection. Whether it's in the sim itself or even in some cases, we might have to just guide someone else who has access to the sim and hunting for things. And that can be a challenge in itself as well, because you're kind of proxying like, oh, let's try this, or, let's try filtering with this wildcard or this or that. But at the same time, that's also a very educational experience. Like, okay, we have this person who's an expert in this sim. um, this is what we're looking for, how can we do that? And then you kind of, at your organization, you might get to know like who to go to come up or help you build a certain detection, or help you hunt for things more efficiently. Or maybe, you've written queries or we've written queries and we know that it can be a little better or modified to work more efficiently. And, somebody else might have that expertise. So it's great to kind of have that open meeting and be able to take input from different teams and different perspectives and say like this is what we've written and this is how it's working, and here's the data that we can see it's highlighting, but we really need it to do this a little faster or to do this a little more efficiently. And that being said, these are great opportunities to see as well. I don't know how many times I've seen, we run an attack. We're expecting these certain event logs to be in the SIM or whatever repository we're working in. And, they're not there, but there's some from, a couple days ago or months ago or what have you. And, then in there we discover, oh, well, there's like a 15-minute delay, between ingestion and being able to search for those logs. So overall, it's just these are great exercises to really see what you need to expect in these scenarios where maybe it's the worst case scenario and something's happening, there's an intruder in your environment. But knowing that, well, these always come in 15 minutes after this is run. So, what do we need to look for now? Where are we at? Um, just things that you get to see and keep in mind because it really is a real time exercise. And then, just kind of feeding off of the previous slide, this slide, I like to, or I guess we all do on the attack team, um, but kind of compartmentalizing our attack paths into categories. So really approaching them from, typically starting off approaching it from a network-based origin. So simulating someone plugging a device into a physical internal network, a rogue device, something that has all of their own tools on it. How would they run all of these attacks? So we're simulating that through like almost a Raspberry Pi like device, running Ubuntu or some kind of Linux flavor, and then, using our red team offensive toolkit, has all of our tools ready to go, and then saying, okay, here's some different methods that I'd use if I was pen testing, or if I was an attacker to get this data really fast. How am I going to get a foothold in this environment? How am I going to pull down information about their Active Directory? And then being able to do that in real time, and showing, some of those attacks that you can perform remotely against Active Directory or against the environment or against a list of hosts um, accessible from that specific spot on the network. Um, and then, after we exhaust all of those kind of attack paths or explore everything that we're worried about from that perspective, then pivoting over to, okay, imagine an attacker was able to successfully phish an employee and now they have access to this random workstation. How would they, move laterally throughout the environment, or what would they do next? And then kind of exhausting all the attacks that we have or that we know of that we can try from a host-based perspective, whether that's Windows or Linux or what have you, whatever is within your environment or very common within your environment. And then even outside of that, going further and saying, well, what about attacks to Azure? What about attacks to Google? What about attacks to, Salesforce? And then creating some scenarios or techniques that might be very valuable to an attacker from there. And then, if you are logging those services, taking those and creating some good detections there as well. So this is, just an example, but kind of if we were doing a purple team and, if you were doing it with Trusted Second, we had 5 days, this is kind of how we would categorize it.
Yeah. And I do want to go back to something that you were saying, Sarah. Perspectives, and this just kind of rolls into something we were talking about earlier. I had a client recently mention that they liked watching us run the queries in the sim because it watching us figure out a detection for the data available in the sim, they thought that was really great because they could see the different thought process that someone is taking to investigate an event and then find the activity and single it out and then produce a detection out of that. So going with no query and trying to build that up. Um, so uh, I had never thought of that type of perspective on the value of doing the purple team and us showing our defensive side, because we do have some basic queries that will run all the time, but no two environments are the same, as Sarah was saying. So the data can look different. So we're usually running the queries fresh every time. So we're trying to pick out our data and we'll build our queries up from essentially a small set of data or a large set of data and whittle it down to little data. So I thought that was a cool perspective, and maybe no one else had thought of it that way. But watching somebody else struggle bus it through data and trying to weed out noise and only get the valuable data, I thought was a neat idea.
Yeah,
perspective.
I love that, and I think that is something that I kind of take for granted, but a lot of clients do like to see that, like you said, because it's kind of from an outsider's perspective, we haven't worked here. We don't really know
Yeah.
what's obvious and what's going on. But so it's kind of nice to see like fundamentally like, okay, yeah, how would you approach this? And that made me think of something else too, Zach, was like I think for people or for clients that are doing a purple team for the first time, um, they might expect us to approach it like a pen test, where we're kind of um, not chastising, what you have in place and where your where your vulnerabilities are. Um, I feel like sometimes it starts off that way, right? They're like, well, a little defensive, like, well, we just can't, put this in place, or, we're working on that. And what I think they come to find out is like, well, we're here for you, we're working for you. We're on a team. Let's do this together.
Yep.
I'm not here to run these attacks and say, oh, look, like I could take this and then go get DA this way. Maybe that does happen, and then we can use that to our advantage to run some more attacks or see it from, if somebody did gain these privileges, what would they do next? Yeah, that's true, but this is not a pen test, we're not looking for holes, we're not looking for vulnerabilities where we can say, look, we found it, we win, that's it. Um, it's more like, okay, so, yeah, take a note, let's put that on the roadmap. We should probably address that. But in the meantime, okay, if someone exploited this, if someone leveraged this, what do we see? What do we see in the sim? What logs are there? What footprint is left? And that's where it really becomes a team effort to say, okay, if we're going to hunt for this, or Zach and I are hunting for this, and this is what we see, somebody on the team might be like, oh no, that's so and so, that's John Smith. Like he's always doing that stuff because he works on this team or he's in finance, and that's regular for him to run those types of files. Um, so it's a beautiful process, it's like we get to just see things all around from a different perspective. And then you as a client or the organization, you get to see us seeing like, how would we do that if we were there? Whether it's from an offensive or defensive perspective. Or like Zach said, if we're struggle bussing, like, uh, what are the first things we're going to do? And it can be a slow process sometimes. It's like, okay, what should we do? We're sharing our screen. I don't want them to see me like trying to try all these different things to find like the specific parameter, but sometimes that's what it takes. And it's better for us to share like, okay, this is what we're trying. It's not working. Anybody have any ideas? Like, so it
Yeah.
becomes really informative, not just for you as the client, but for us as well. So we get to kind of pick up all of these little bits of advice and best practices, and oh, this works for this sim the best, or I always encounter this issue with not just the sim, but like with this OS or with this tool or this attack. And we get to kind of compile that all into tribal knowledge and then use it forever on different clients. So it's a great exercise overall.
Yeah. Um, yeah. And then just to comment, I can't speak for anyone else who does purple teams, but at least for us, it is not a you did bad. It is never this is
Right.
bad. We don't chastise anyone's configurations. Everything is different. Everyone has different rules. It is about improving, right? This is just the way you're set up, but we can do something different and we can get you to the detection or the prevention. So it is always a positive conversation. We are never there to tell you did bad. The report is not written in a way that it's a fail or a pass, and you did poorly. It's always this is what happened, but you can do these things, or here's a query for you. You can turn that into a detection. So um,
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
always a positive thing. We do have a question. Um, When building out your tests during a purple team, how complex or advanced are your attacks typically to begin with? Purple teams tend to start with just running atomic red team, but really too much in the way of custom attacks, not too much thoughts or recommendations. So atomic red team is great. They're definitely just just the snippets of the tactics. They're diced up really well. You know, we will start in the first time we interact with somebody and we're doing a purple team for them. Doesn't matter how mature they may or may not be. We'll come in and we'll do all the basic tests. We want to make sure all the basics are covered, right? Can you see authentications? Can you see when someone authenticates a lot, successfully or unsuccessfully? And, you know, can you see when someone's looking around your network, and if someone is acting suspicious on a machine, valid user, you know, can you see when they're touching things they're not supposed to, or when they're trying to, you know, elevate their privileges? So we'll start out always as kind of basic. We don't use just like pre-can point and click things, unless there's no other way to do it. But we try to do everything by hand as much as possible, and we'll build up our complexity as things go on, right? Even if it is the first time we're interacting with someone and the maturity is very high, then we might forego some of the basics and move up a notch on complexity, and we'll do some other attacks. In terms of recommendations, like I said, using a atomic red team is not a bad thing. Whatever's going to increase your maturity and set you up with a better posture from when you entered your time, your engagement, your scenarios, then it's positive, right? It's a value add. As far as recommendations on how to replay techniques to the limit that you're allowed to in your environment, or if you're doing those in other environments, reading blog posts, right? Whatever's happening, and starting to put together a playbook of techniques, right? A lot of techniques are reused. And like we were saying earlier, those basic steps, if you're not cutting those off, then the attack chains are valid. So start focusing on just some of those basic techniques and moving from there. And then once you kind of squash one, move on to the next one. In terms of other frameworks or repositories, I mean, I don't have any off the top of my head right now. I don't know if Sarah, you do. But to kind of get you going on replaying techniques, it's really just trying to see what's valid, and don't get caught up in over uh whatever you call it, just overplayed narratives on stories of, you know, this latest attack or this exploit that no one has access to because it's not public. I would don't try to replay those, right? Just that basic techniques that work all the time. Focus on those. Sarah, do you have anything
Yeah.
on that question?
Yeah, so kind of same thing, like you said, we're not using a lot of automation in our attack simulations. We're also trying to divide it up still into bite-sized pieces. So, you know, I mean, we do have some offerings that are like, we would just want a live fire, just throw all the attacks at us and we want to see what we catch. But you know, typically a purple team is like us explaining, let's say I was, you know, doing like the red team side of things. I'm going to say, okay, this is what I'm doing now. Here I need to, you know, modify this attack command to this environment, to this domain, to this user that I have. And here's the command that I'm using. Here's the output. Oh, it didn't work. Like something, you know, what can I do to get around it? So just, I guess, to answer that question, you know, we are doing everything manually as much as possible. We do have a lot of things that, you know, especially if they're pretty fundamental, like they can be, you know, it might seem a little rudimentary. but it's still, beneficial. Maybe it's like, oh yeah, we definitely have an alert for that. And then I run the attack and it's like, you know, all the alerts and everybody's aware of it instantly. Okay, great. Well, now we've validated that. Let's move on to something a little more complex. And what I love about it too is maybe we'll start, with some of those fundamentals, but then we can definitely move into, okay, we have this much time left. How did you do on your last pen test? How did, if somebody else has tested this environment, what did they leverage? How did they get in? What did they exploit? Oh, you fixed that? Okay, well, let's make sure that it's fixed and we can't still use it. Um, so we try to go above and beyond and, use up the time to the best of our ability to really make it work for you, make it valuable for your organization, revisit things that you're concerned about. Or like Zach said, yeah, maybe there's this point of concept that, you're really concerned about, and maybe maybe there's no like specific way to do it with the access that we have. But what can we do that's similar? Or, what would they need to gain up to that point to run that attack? Let's do those scenarios and try to chain that together to create a detection. Okay, well, this is what we would see prior to someone running that more complex attack. So let's run that, or let's see what kind of data is created in doing those steps. Um, and then thoughts and recommendations, just there's nothing wrong with automation or, running like the same things that you're seeing all the time, just to see where you stand. Because like we said, things are always changing. Um, but in terms of like our specific offering for purple teaming, we are going to try to make it as valuable as possible for your environment based on, what you use for business. I mean, every environment is different, every organization is different. Um, and so I think this is a little more valuable in terms of saying, this is what we need. This is where our pain points are. Can you help us address that? And then we all kind of work together as a team for a week and, document everything like Zach said, so that even after we're done working together, you can go back and say, oh, this is how, I would replay that attack if I were to run it again in our environment. Um, and yeah, I think overall, just doing things manually like that, one step at a time, and kind of visibly showing how it works, how I would run it, what tool I would use, and then seeing what data you're seeing on the sim side is very beneficial. Zach, did you want to answer the next one?
Yeah. So the question is, what metrics are we tracking, or do we report on? And then over sequential purple teams, how are you like following up, or what are you checking, and how are you doing improvement upon the last? So with metrics, when we run our purple teams, we're looking for, when we run an attack, what does your environment do? Are you logging it? Are you detecting it? Are you preventing it? Is it kind of a mix of both, like all those things? And then we try and work with that, right? And then we always, whether you prevented it, whether you're detecting it, we do try to offer more hunting queries or detections, maybe from a different perspective or additionally, right? Yes, you can prevent it, but don't you also, and with no alert, but don't you also want to know that it happened? And we'll build those. But that's the main set of things that we're looking for. And then those are all tracked in the reporting and they're given to you. And then you can see, even if you weren't there, you would know how the environment reacted. And if you're
Yeah,
running out of time, but
exactly.
and then
I think the three, I guess if you wanted to, Zach, like put them into three categories right now in our reporting, I guess our metrics are detection, if you can deflect the attack, or if it's deterred in some way.
yeah, and also improvement. If we come in again, we will offer to validate all of the past detections and attacks, right? So if you wanted to see if those are still valid or still in place, maybe you made a change. Maybe you have a new logging infrastructure, or maybe you have new parsing that you put in place and you want to recheck those. We'll do those, and we won't rerun unless asked, right? We're not going to just redo the old thing and just say that's great. We'll try to do some new stuff, but we do also like to validate. So we try not to replay things we've already done in the environment unless it's requested or a change has been made. If you let us know that there's changes, then we probably will validate things again really quickly, just to make sure that the change didn't lose visibility. And then also we're using we try and apply things to MITRE. I think, as far as metrics go, right, we do try and apply things to MITRE in the report. We're swiftly running out of time.
Yes. Just I guess our last points in terms of these strategic recommendations are, if you were to do a purple team with us, once you do get that report, we are listing there, categorized like how well you're doing, where the improvements can be seen, what we saw, and then, how we modified things or improved it in terms of detection, deflection, or deterrence. And then, overall, you can take from that, what would trusted sec provide as a strategic recommendation? And most of the time, it has to do with some of these points, which are like, could ingestion capability be changed or modified or improved? Are you monitoring endpoints? Sometimes that's not always the case, or maybe it's on the roadmap. But if you did, here's the improvements that you would see, or improved visibility that you would see. Same with like command line logging. There's just a lot more that you can do with that in terms of querying data. And then overall, it's just nice to have a bit of documentation or a viewpoint on your overall security posture.
I don't really have anything to add to that one. Are there any further questions on anything we talked about, or anything related to purple team or defense? And we would always recommend, if we saw some way you could augment the way you log your data in your environment, we would always recommend that. As Sarah was saying, if you're not collecting some logs that could be useful, we would show that off, right? If you're not collecting logs from an endpoint, or maybe you're collecting logs but not an event ID that is, in terms of Windows, an event ID that would have highlighted the activity really nicely, we'll show you those logs and how they would benefit you if you were to ingest them. There are different values to collecting logs that are noisy or not, but filter, log, and report. Okay.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all of our time. Thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for hanging out. And if if you missed part of it, you can check it out. It'll be posted to YouTube. You can get the whole thing. It's recorded. And all right. Happy hunting.
Thanks, everyone.